I mean, really, look at this. Soft candle glow cannot hide pure fabric.
The boardroom went silent the moment the door opened. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. 12 executives sat around a polished mahogany table, paper scattered, panic written across every face. The company was 3 hours from losing its biggest contract. And then, in walked the one person nobody had invited. An old woman. Same gray coat. Same worn leather bag she carried to every family dinner. The coat Sarah had mocked just 2 weeks ago, in front of the entire family, calling it an embarrassment, and asking if Grandma had raided a thrift store. Nobody laughed now. The old woman didn't rush. She walked past the frozen executives, past her own son, past Sarah, whose hands had started to tremble around her coffee cup, and sat down. Not in any empty chair. In the chair at the head of the table, the one reserved for the majority shareholder, the one nobody had ever seen filled. "I think," the old woman said quietly, setting her worn bag on the table, "it's time we talked about who actually owns this company." Sarah's mouth went dry, and what happened in the next 10 minutes would change everything she thought she knew about her husband's family, and about the woman she'd spent 2 years looking down on. If you believe kindness and humility are strengths, not weaknesses, hit that like button right now, because this story is about to prove exactly that, and if you've ever misjudged someone because of how they looked, stay till the end. This one's going to hit close to home. 3 weeks earlier, none of this seemed possible. Sarah married into the Whitmore family with big expectations. Her husband Daniel came from money, real money. A logistics empire his grandfather supposedly built from nothing decades ago, before quietly stepping back from public life. Sarah had never met the grandfather. He'd passed years before she came into the picture. But she'd met his widow, Eleanor. Eleanor Whitmore was 78 years old. She lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom house 20 minutes outside the city. She drove a 12-year-old sedan. She wore the same gray wool coat to every family gathering, winter or not, and carried a leather bag so old the strap had been stitched twice. To Sarah, none of this made sense. If the Whitmores were truly wealthy, why did Grandma live like that? She never asked. She just assumed. And assumptions, in Sarah's mind, quickly turned into judgment. At every family dinner, Sarah found small ways to make her discomfort known. She'd offer Eleanor a seat away from the good china, just in case. She'd comment, just loud enough, about how some people really don't dress for their status. She once asked, in front of the whole table, if Eleanor needed a little extra help covering the cost of gifts for the grandkids. Daniel always looked uncomfortable. He'd quietly change the subject. But he never said a word to correct her, not once. Eleanor never defended herself either. She'd simply smile, nod, and let the comments pass like wind through an open window. If it hurt her, she never showed it. She'd sit quietly, sipping her tea, watching. Always watching. Sarah mistook that silence for weakness. She had no idea it was something else entirely. The final straw came 2 weeks ago at Daniel's birthday dinner. Eleanor arrived a few minutes late, her gray coat dusted with rain, apologizing softly for the delay. Her old car had trouble starting again. Sarah didn't hold back. In front of 12 family members, in front of Daniel's business partners who'd been invited that night, she laughed and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Honestly, Eleanor, at some point you have to ask yourself if that coat is an embarrassment to this family." The table went quiet. A few people looked down at their plates. Daniel's jaw tightened, but again, he said nothing. Eleanor simply set down her purse, looked at Sarah with an expression that was almost amused, and said one sentence that no one at the table understood the weight of. "You might be surprised what this old coat has seen." Then she smiled, sat down, and asked someone to pass the bread. Nobody thought about that sentence again. until 3 weeks later, when the entire company was on the verge of collapse, and the one person who could save it walked through that boardroom door wearing the very same coat. She didn't know it yet, but Sarah was about to learn exactly what that sentence meant. Eleanor placed both hands flat on the table and looked around the room, her voice calm but unmistakably in charge. 40 years ago, my husband and I started this company out of a rented garage with $11,000 and a secondhand delivery truck, she said. When he passed, everyone assumed the company passed fully to our son. It didn't. 61% of this company has always belonged to me. Daniel, sitting a few seats down, looked just as stunned as everyone else. This wasn't a story he'd grown up hearing. His mother had kept it buried for decades. Why now? One executive finally asked. Why come forward today? Eleanor's eyes moved briefly toward Sarah before answering. Because for years I've watched how people in this family treat those they think have no power. I wanted to see who would still show respect when they believed I had nothing to offer them. The room was silent. Sarah felt her face burn, every mocking comment she'd ever made replaying in her mind at once. This company is 3 hours from losing the Hartman contract, Eleanor continued. All business now. Not because the numbers don't work. Because half this room has been too busy protecting egos instead of fixing the actual problem. She turned to the nervous young analyst at the end of the table, the one who'd been too intimidated to speak up all morning. You. The report you sent me last night. Explain it. Now. The young analyst blinked, startled, then nodded and began walking the room through a solution he'd been too afraid to bring up in front of senior executives. Eleanor listened closely, asked 2 sharp questions, then nodded once. Implement it, she said. That's how we save this contract. Just like that, the room shifted into motion. Eleanor Whitmore, the woman in the plain gray coat, had walked in and taken control with more clarity than anyone else in the building had shown all week. Afterward, as the room emptied, Sarah stayed frozen in her seat, unsure whether to speak or simply disappear. Eleanor walked over, unhurried, and sat down beside her. I'm not going to lecture you, Eleanor said gently. I think you already understand what today meant. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. For everything I said. The coat, the comments. I had no idea, but that doesn't excuse it. No, Eleanor agreed softly. It doesn't. But it also doesn't define who you have to be going forward. She reached into her old leather bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Inside was a proposal, a junior strategy role, working directly under Eleanor for the next year. I'm not offering you this because of who you married, Eleanor said. I'm offering it because I think underneath the judgment, there's someone capable of learning. But you'll start at the bottom. Same as everyone else. Sarah stared at the folder, then at Eleanor, understanding fully for the first time. This wasn't punishment. It was a chance. Why would you do this for me, after everything? Eleanor smiled, the same quiet smile she'd worn through every insult at every family dinner. Because someone gave me a chance once, too, when I was young and had nothing but a rented garage and a stubborn belief that I was worth more than people assumed. I'm simply passing it forward. Sarah accepted the folder with both hands. It was the first time in 2 years she'd felt truly humbled. Not embarrassed, not defensive, just humbled. Over the following months, Sarah showed up early. She listened more than she spoke. She learned the business from the ground up, the way Eleanor once had. And slowly, the wealthy daughter-in-law who once mocked a coat became someone who genuinely earned her place at that table. As for Eleanor, she kept wearing the same gray coat to every family dinner, not because she couldn't afford another one, but because it reminded her and everyone else that true worth was never about appearances. It was about character, the kind that shows up even when no one thinks you're watching. If this story reminded you that humility is never weakness, and that real power often walks in quietly, wearing the last thing anyone expects, comment, the coat, if you believe kindness and character will always outlast judgment. And if you've ever misjudged someone before knowing their full story, take a moment to sit with that, because sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones who could teach us the most.